You finally got it. The promotion, the relationship, the number in your bank account, the apartment, the recognition. Whatever it was, you spent months, maybe years, moving toward it. You made sacrifices. You endured the waiting. You told yourself that when it arrived, something inside you would shift. And then it arrived. And nothing shifted. Or something did shift, but in the wrong direction. Instead of fullness, there was a kind of silence. Instead of arrival, a strange floating sensation, like a signal that was supposed to come never did. You looked around at what you'd built, what you'd earned, what you'd finally become, and felt at the center of it an inexplicable absence. Here's what I need to tell you right now, before we go any further. That emptiness is not a malfunction. It is not ingratitude. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a message. And the fact that you're here, listening for what that message might mean, already tells me something important about where you are in your own inner journey. But here's the part that might be harder to hear. The reason you feel empty after getting what you wanted is not because you got the wrong thing. It's because what you wanted may never have been truly yours to begin with. Before we go into that, I want to pause here. If what I just said stirred something in you, a recognition, an unease, a quiet, yes, that, I'd love to know. Take a moment and drop a comment below. When was the last time you achieved something you thought would change everything, but didn't? You don't have to explain it. Just name it. That act alone, naming it, is already part of the process we're about to explore together. And if this kind of content speaks to something in you, a like and a subscription help this channel reach others who are searching for the same language you are. Now, let's keep going. There's a specific quality to this particular kind of emptiness. It's different from ordinary disappointment, where something doesn't go the way you hoped. It's different from grief, where you lose something that was real and present. This emptiness arrives precisely in the moment of success. It moves in when the thing you pursued finally lands. And it has a texture that's almost impossible to describe to people who haven't felt it. Some people call it the post-achievement crash. They assume it's biochemical, a kind of dopamine come down. And yes, there's a physiological component. But what I've found, and what Jung mapped with extraordinary precision, is that the real source runs much deeper than neurochemistry. Think of the last time it happened. Maybe it was smaller than a career milestone. Maybe it was finishing something you'd been building for a long time. Maybe it was reaching the end of a difficult relationship, or finally receiving an acknowledgement you'd been quietly craving. And in the moment it arrived, instead of completion, you felt a kind of bewilderment, like arriving at a destination and realizing you don't recognize the landscape. That bewilderment is not arbitrary. It's a response to a very specific psychological event, the persona 1, but you were not there to receive the prize. What is the persona? Not in the dictionary sense, not in the casual everyday use of the word. In Jung's framework, the persona, from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in classical theater, is the functional layer of the self that we present to the world. It is the version of us that has learned with remarkable precision what is acceptable, admirable, successful, and safe in the social environment we inhabit. The persona is not false, exactly. That's an important distinction. It contains real abilities, real traits, real behaviors. But it is always partial. It is the edited version, the one that emphasizes what earns approval and mutes what might invite rejection or confusion. And here's where it becomes psychologically significant. The persona doesn't just shape how we present ourselves. Over time, when we lose contact with what lies beneath it, the persona begins to shape what we want. It starts generating its own desires that are perfectly calibrated to the world outside, but have almost nothing to do with the world inside. Imagine wearing a perfectly tailored suit that isn't yours. From the outside, it fits flawlessly. People admire it. It elevates your status. Strangers assume it says something true about who you are. And in a sense, you believe them, because you've been wearing it so long that you've forgotten what your own body actually feels like unclothed. But underneath, something is slightly wrong. You move carefully. You can't fully relax. There are moments when you catch yourself mid-breath and realize you've been holding something in without knowing why. And when you finally take it off, when success arrives and the achievement is complete, you realize you were never comfortable. You were just convincing. That is the persona. And every single one of us is wearing one. How does the persona become so powerful that it can quietly hijack the direction of an entire life? The answer begins not in adulthood, not in conscious choice, but in the earliest layers of socialization. You were not born wanting a specific kind of career. You were not born desiring a particular type of recognition. You were born with raw, unformed needs for safety, for connection, for expression, for meaning. What happened next is that the environment around you began, slowly, persistently, often without malice, to shape which expressions of those needs were welcome and which were not. The child who was praised for being smart learned that intellectual performance produces warmth and belonging. The child who was admired for being strong learned that emotional need creates distance. The child who brought home achievements learned that achievements are the currency of love. None of these lessons were taught explicitly. They were absorbed through repetition, through the subtle grammar of what was celebrated and what was ignored. Jung was precise about this. The persona is built from what he called the demands of the external world, in negotiation with the individual's own nature. It is, in his words, a compromise between the individual and society. The persona serves a real function. Without some capacity to adapt to the social environment, we cannot navigate it. The problem is not having a persona. The problem is losing sight of what it is. Because here is what society does exceptionally well. It rewards persona-driven achievement. The external world is organized almost entirely around persona metrics. Title, output, image, status, productivity. These are the measurements that translate into tangible benefit. Safety, belonging, resources, recognition. So the persona is not just psychologically reinforced, it's economically incentivized, which means that for decades, a person can pursue goals that were assembled by their persona, be genuinely rewarded for reaching them, and receive no signal whatsoever that something fundamental has been bypassed. The system works. It just doesn't work for the part of you that actually needs to be fed. What if the life you're chasing was never meant to fulfill you? That question is not rhetorical, and it's not meant to destabilize you, or not only that, it's meant to open a crack in the certainty we carry about our own desires. It's one of the most disorienting discoveries a person can make is that the wanting itself can be borrowed. There's something I want you to sit with for a moment. When you picture what you're working toward right now, your next goal, your current ambition, where does the wanting live in your body? Is it in your chest, warm and expansive? Or is it more like a pressure, a tightness, a sense of something you should be moving toward? There's a reason the feeling disappears the moment you get what you wanted. And that reason is that the desire was never rooted in your actual interior life. It was rooted in the persona's map of what success looks like. And the persona doesn't know how to feel satisfied, because satisfaction is not its function. Its function is social navigation. Once the goal is reached, the persona simply recalibrates and selects the next target. There is no arrival because the persona has no interest in arriving. The self, Jung's term for the deeper organizing center of the psyche, the layer that holds what is most authentically yours, the self was never consulted in the design of the goal. And when you finally get there, it is the self's silence you're hearing. Something I want to offer you here, because I know this is the kind of territory where information alone isn't always enough. What we're exploring right now, this gap between the persona and the self, between the life we've been building and the life that actually belongs to us, is genuinely difficult to navigate through reflection alone. At some point, that deeper work needs more than a video can hold. If you feel that pull, that readiness to go further than a single conversation allows, there's a link in the description that might meet you where you are. When the video ends, consider following it. What waits there is not a shortcut. It's a structure for the journey you are already on. For now, let's continue. There is a particular phase in the persona's life cycle that Jung documented with almost uncomfortable accuracy. He called it persona inflation. This is the stage where a person becomes so identified with their social mask that the distinction between the persona and the actual self effectively collapses. The mask is no longer experienced as a mask, it is experienced as identity. In this state, the goals of the persona feel not just compelling, but deeply, urgently personal. This is what I want. This is who I am. This is what I'm building. The language of authentic selfhood is borrowed entirely by the persona and used to pursue things that have nothing to do with the actual self. And the truly paradoxical thing, the thing that makes persona inflation so insidious, is that it often coincides with peak external functioning. The inflated persona produces, it achieves, it manages relationships skillfully, it earns recognition. From the outside, a person in persona inflation looks like someone who has it together. They look like someone who knows what they want and is moving toward it with purpose. But inside, something is thinning. The gap between performance and experience widens. The person begins to function like a very well-designed engine running on fuel that doesn't quite combust right. Everything moves, everything turns. The numbers look correct, but there's a subtle wrongness in the sound of it that only the driver can hear. And this is where the persona's success becomes its own undoing. Because the more completely it achieves its goals, the more inescapable the emptiness becomes. When there was still striving, there was the illusion that the feeling of incompleteness was temporary, that it would be resolved by the achievement. Once the achievement arrives and the feeling persists, that illusion is no longer available. The most dangerous success is the one that disconnects you from yourself. Not because success is dangerous, but because achieving the wrong goal removes your last remaining reason to keep searching. And then comes what we might call the moment of collapse, though collapse is not quite the right word, because often it doesn't announce itself dramatically. It's quieter than that. It can arrive as a morning when you wake up and feel, without explanation, that you don't recognize your own life. Not that it's bad. You might be aware, even as you feel it, that from the outside it looks enviable. But it's as if you're looking at a picture of a life rather than inhabiting one. It can arrive as a flatness that settles over the things that used to feel meaningful. The project you cared about, the relationship you built, the identity you spent years constructing, they're still there. They still function. But something that used to animate them from the inside has become very quiet. It can arrive as a question you can't unask. Is this actually it? Not asked in despair, but with a kind of genuine, almost childlike bewilderment. Because the answer you expected, the one that was supposed to arrive when the goal was reached, never came. Jung understood this moment not as breakdown, but as potential. In his framework, this kind of collapse, this dissolving of the persona's certainty, is often the precondition for what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you were shaped to be. The emptiness is not the problem, it's the message. It is the self, finally loud enough to be heard, saying the map you've been following was not drawn for you. Something else is possible. But to find it, you'll have to stop performing long. Enough to listen. Not all desires come from you. Some were installed. And the first real act of self-reclamation is learning to tell the difference. This is not as simple as asking, do I really want this? Because the persona is sophisticated. It has access to the language of authenticity. It can produce the sensation of genuine desire, the feeling of personal investment, the experience of caring deeply, and still be entirely constructed around external expectations. But there are signals. The first is the quality of the wanting. Persona-driven desire has a characteristic pressure to it. It leans toward what can be externally verified, what can be shown, what produces a legible result in the world. There is an urgency about it that has less to do with internal pull and more to do with the anxiety of not having arrived yet. It is goal-shaped. Once the goal is removed, the desire has no internal life of its own. Authentic desire that comes from closer to the self, tends to have a different texture. It is less urgent and more persistent. It doesn't require an audience. It doesn't collapse when the goal is reached because it was never really about the goal. It was about the quality of contact with whatever the activity or direction represents. People who discover they are following authentic desire often describe it as something they do, even if no one ever saw it, even if nothing came from it externally. The second signal is the response to obstacles. When the persona's project is blocked, the typical response is frustration, anxiety, or a kind of grinding persistence driven by the need to not fail. When the self's direction is blocked, there is often something different. A recalibration, a search for another way in, something that feels more like stubbornness rooted in love than performance driven by fear. You didn't fail to feel fulfilled. The goal failed to be real. And that distinction matters because it changes where you look next. So what does reconnection actually look like? Not as a concept, as a practice, as something you can actually do in the middle of a life that still requires you to function. The first thing I'd offer is this. Begin to notice what you protect, not what you proclaim, what you quietly, privately make time for even when it isn't useful, isn't productive, doesn't move any external needle. The self often hides in the margins of the persona's schedule, in the thing you do when you think no one is watching, in the interest you've been putting off until you have more time, which is to say, possibly forever, unless you notice that the very persistence of that deferral is information. The second is to sit with experiences that produced unexpected resonance, not peak performances or public successes. Those belong to the persona, but the moments of unexpected aliveness, the conversation that changed the direction of a week, the book you couldn't put down for reasons you couldn't fully articulate, the piece of music that arrived at the exact right moment and said something you didn't have words for. These experiences are not random. They are the self-leaving fingerprints. The third, and this one requires a kind of courage, is to grieve the borrowed desires, not as failure, but as release. There is something genuinely painful about recognizing that a goal you pursued with real effort, real sacrifice, real time, was not truly yours. Persona will resist this recognition. It will insist that the goal was valid, that the investment was meaningful, that to acknowledge the displacement is to invalidate the years. But grief is not invalidation. It is the honest recognition of what was real and what was constructed. And on the other side of that grief, something becomes available that wasn't before. The ability to want for yourself again. If you've walked this far with me, through the persona, through the inflation, through the collapse, through the quiet work of beginning to tell the difference between a borrowed desire and your own, I want to offer something before we close. This video, like any video, can only take you to the edge of the territory. It can name the landscape. It can point toward the path. But the actual walking, the genuine encounter with your own persona, with the shape of what you've been chasing and why, that happens in a different kind of space. If today something in you is ready for that, not just to understand these ideas, but to move through them, there's a link in the description that may serve you well. It's there for when you feel ready, and there's no pressure to be ready now. What I do want to say before the silence that follows is this. The question the emptiness is really asking is not, why didn't this work? The question is, who were you underneath everything you learned to want? Jung believed that the journey toward the self was not an addition to life, not something you pursued after the real work was done, but the work itself. The individuation process doesn't begin when you've earned the right to stop performing. It begins precisely in the moments where the performance fails to deliver what you promised yourself it would, which means that the emptiness you felt, are feeling perhaps right now, is not a sign that something went wrong. It is a sign that something is beginning, that the persona's grip has loosened just enough for the question to get through, that the part of you that has been waiting quietly beneath every achievement and every projection and every carefully constructed version of who you were supposed to become, has finally found a moment of silence long enough to speak. You don't need to have the answer yet. The answer is not a destination you arrive at and plant a flag in. It is a direction, a quality of attention, a willingness to stay curious about your own interior long after the world has decided it knows exactly who you are. The suit that doesn't fit you, you can take it off. Not all at once, not in a single moment of renunciation, but slowly, carefully, with the kind of patience that the self deserves after a long time of being asked to wait. What remains when it comes off is not emptiness. It's you. One last thing before you go. Do you think your biggest goal right now is truly yours or something you learned to want? I'm not asking you to have an answer. I'm asking you to hold the question. Drop it in the comments because sometimes the first honest response to that question is the most important thing. You'll write today. And if this conversation meant something to you, share it with someone who might be ready to hear it. Leave a like. And if you want to keep going deeper into this territory, the channel is here for exactly that. Thank you for being here.